Welcome back, Breakaway Wealth. I'm your host, Jim Oliver, and with me today, my co-host, Nick Kosko. Nick, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me again. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Hey, Nick, I'm going to dive right in because we got a lot of material to cover here. So, audience, if you want to grab some popcorn, grab some coffee, depending on what time of day that you're listening to this or watching this, buckle up because we've got a lot of information to go through. So, Nick, we're talking about chapter 4. And chapter 4, I love the title, Becoming Your Own Banker, right?
Yeah, that's right. Chapter 4 of The Case for IBC, Nelson's last published work that you can find at infinitebanking.org.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just dig in here, Nick. Now, this chapter is not a replacement for Becoming Your Own Banker, Nelson's book. That is the best book on learning how to do IBC and becoming your own banker. And just like in that book, Nick, they don't change the interest rates and things like that. Interest rates change all the time. There's no reason to tinker with them because they're always out of date. Okay. But the other thing is that when we think about money is a commodity, right? When we're talking about building wealth, et cetera, it's not all about money. And we're not talking about banking like a commercial bank. We're talking about how to bring the banking to the you and me level.
Yeah, that's how I always like Nelson would say it. It should be at the you and me level and not this centralized system that we really can't be a player of or
right.
a meaningful player in.
Because remember, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, we're just on the wrong side of that centralized system is what Nelson was really trying to explain to us.
Yeah, because when you bring the banking to the you and me level, it's very much in contrast to central banking, right? Which, Nelson points out has caused so much conflict and misery in the world. So let's talk about money flowing though. And, we use this every day, but someone once made the comment, if some authoritative power distributed all the money in the world among all the people in the world, within 10 years' time, 97% of all the money would be under the control of 3% of the people. Now, why does that happen, Nick?
Because they understand how to get money to flow to them instead of away from them.
That's right. And they don't understand banking, right? And we're going to talk about that in a minute, but let's talk about that. Money must flow, otherwise it's worthless. And motion is a law of God. If blood doesn't flow in and out through our bodies, not in and out, I'm sorry, if it doesn't flow through our bodies, we die. If air doesn't flow in and out of our bodies, we die. If water doesn't flow, it becomes stagnant, it's dead. If money doesn't flow, it dies. Having your money sit in an account for years and years and years, it's dying.
Right. It's like I remember you explaining one time early on in our conversations the concept of money follows the sun. Banks understand this so well. It's not just happening in our local level, but overnight lending. People hear that term, overnight lending rates. Well, that's the banks lending to each other so they can maintain their ratios. And when a bank closes in New York, they're lending to a bank in Chicago and so forth, all the way around the world.
Because letting it sit there overnight is not an option because it's dying, and banks do not let their money die, right?
Yeah. You think about this, Jim. We have a lot of business owners, and all these business owners own assets, right?
Yep.
And a lot of times that business is only open, say, from 8 to 5. But you talk to the really good guys that have figured out how to keep those assets producing revenue 24/7. And so that's what the banks have essentially done in that equation.
Absolutely. I mean, banks want to banks want to keep their money moving, just like we all should want to keep our money moving, right?
Yeah.
All right. So let's look at a couple other things here real quick, Nick. So he talks about the banking being like water. There's only one pool of water in the world, and it flows around the world and through us and back into the ocean and around the world. and it's constantly in motion. And the banking system, just like you said, is the same exact thing, is it's constantly in motion. So when we look at, Nelson's background being in forestry, and also let's back up. First of all, Nelson's a Christian, right? And so this is all seen through that lens. And
right.
all of this motion and everything that's about infinite banking is biblical. It's you could go right to the Bible. It'll tell you this is how you're supposed to use your money. And also be an Austrian leaning, or Austrian in his economic view, right? But he thinks long term. He thinks free market. He thinks control, self responsibility, everything else. So as Nelson kind of went through his life and got involved in different things, he started to see some things, and his fundamental insight was that we could secede from that central banking system.
Right.
But Nelson always likes to start with the problem. Well, what's the problem?
I just kind of look at it from that 10,000 foot view, which Nelson would have enjoyed from the airplane he was flying, that we're basically just giving up control of our money to other people all the time. And Jim, we've said this time and time again on here, that you're going to see 5,000 to 10,000 ads a day, and
right.
They all have one thing in common, and that's to get money to flow away from you and to be in the control of other people's hands. And the financial system, whether it's the green line or the whale, or what, name the bank, they're playing that game of getting control of your money so well you don't even realize there's a game being played. And that's the peril, is that we don't see it. And we use this iceberg analogy in our presentation, and it's a little overused and whatnot, but it's just metaphorical to how big of the system is, and then how little we're shown.
Nick, it's kind of like the FedEx logo. We used to use that, and maybe that is a great example, and we got it from Nelson, so we didn't
Sure.
think this up on our own. But when you look at the FedEx logo, most people don't see the arrow. But if you look for the arrow and somebody points it out to you, you see the arrow, and then you never see a FedEx truck the same way again. And it's right in front of you the whole time, driving up and down your street. I think it stops at our house every single day. And so, the logo, if you don't look for the arrow, nobody points it out to you, you don't see it. And it's the same way with this. And so one of the things that we have to accept now, Nelson, he explains in this chapter that he was in real estate. He was having success until some interest rate changes and interest rates turned. Now we're in super low interest rate environment right now, but it will turn. And when it turns, you got to be ready, right? Yeah. But one of the things that he says, Nick, is he says your need for finance during your lifetime is greater than your need for death benefit. Because when most people think about buying life insurance, they focus on death benefit. But we are focusing on financing and capitalization. Make sense?
Yeah. So you just touched on something, this need for finance. And I think that what that brings to the question is, people don't realize this one simple fact. And I always try to just boil this down if I'm having a short conversation with someone about what we do. And that is, we're just trying to solve that one little problem. And that is that we finance everything we buy. And right. The reality of it is we're either paying interest, and everyone sees that real simply. You see that amount of interest. And so many people have said, oh, well, you know what? I don't want to pay interest to someone else. So guess what? I'll pay cash. And then that gets into this other problem. And that is that when you pay cash, you give up the ability to earn interest on those dollars forever. And so that's all we're trying to do, is just solve that problem of getting all that interest that you would have paid someone else or that you gave up. We want all of that to flow back to us, and it's just take it to that simple little project.
So let's start with where Nelson starts, where the problem for the all-American normal, when he says all American, kind of the normal American family, right? Now, he's got this person at 29 years old making $28,500 a year. Don't worry about how much the guy's making or the family's making. Okay. Just again, you gotta just adjust in your head for these things. But I promise you, these percentages stay pretty true. Is 20% is spent on transportation, 30% on housing, 45% is spent on living, clothes, groceries, contributions, charitable causes, car payments, boat payments, insurance, all of those things, right?
Yep.
And some of those things are charged on credit cards, or they're financed with banknotes, or they're financed by paying cash for them, that, like you just said, giving up interest that could have been earned otherwise. And then we're told to save, right? 5% of our disposable income, but really it's supposed to be 10, so where's the 10 coming from? Most people aren't saving 10%. He shows a chart in there that the savings rate just isn't 10%. We even have books that tell us if we save 10% of our income. And then we have Robert Kiyosaki telling us savers are losers. And the reason is because of inflation and that money just sitting there and dying. And so let's just kind of look at, again, what's happening, because this young guy is paying interest, right?
Yeah.
And the problem really is that these things are financed by other banking organizations.
Right.
And he thinks, well, it's okay. I'm in a low interest rate environment and I'm only paying 5% or 4% or 7%, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But he doesn't realize that he's got one problem: is the rate isn't the issue. It's the volume of interest. Right?
Lies.
Right. So if you add up all of those things that we went through on transportation and housing and living, you'll see that 34.5 cents of every dollar, every disposable dollar, that means what?
Net dollar. Yeah.
That's right.
Dollar
is paid out to interest. So, and now remember, he's trying to save 10%. Now think about this, Nick. You earn $1. Somebody else gets 34.5 cents and you get 10 cents. Now, in some ways, you're a slave then, right? Or a partial slave.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, that's somebody else is getting, and by the way, he already paid tax. Somebody else is getting more of your money. So you're giving your money to this banking organization, this banking system.
Right.
All right. So that's, if you can't fix that, you will not win if you keep those percentages. Now, some people win because they make more and they spend less, and they have a scarcity standard of living, and then their assets overtake that somewhere down the line, and it takes years and years and years, or really increases in your income.
Hey Jim, yeah. I want to clarify something you just said, because I don't want the audience to lose this, because this is really important. We got 34.5 cents of every net dollar going to someone else. That's flowing away from you. Okay.
Yep.
Then we're supposed to save 10%. Okay. That's a net between that delta between those two is 24.5 cents. For a lot of people, we're only saving 5%. So it'd be 29.5 cents. And with Nelson, if you read his book, Nelson used to fly airplanes. So he would use some aviation analogies in there, but you have a financial headwind happening in your life right there. And it is it's almost impossible to overcome if you don't solve that issue. What's a bigger issue? Is it you're not saving enough, or is it that you have all this money flowing away from you? Well, the reality of it is it's that you have all that money flowing away from you. And that's something that you can control a lot simpler. And that is, hey, what's the strategies we're going to impart to turn that around so that, no pun intended, we create a tailwind for ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a great point, Nick. Thanks for bringing that up and pointing that out. Hopefully the audience gets that. All right. So the next part is, he says, how do banks make money? So let's dive into that a little bit. And this is the simplest way to understand this that I've ever seen. Okay.
Hey, if you're just listening to the podcast, hey, this is going to be recorded as a video. You can go to our YouTube channel, just to CreateTailwind, all one word on YouTube, and you'll be able to see what we're presenting here.
Absolutely. Okay, so the bank doesn't use its own money, right? It uses someone else's money. So it needs a depositor. So somebody comes down to the bank and they deposit money in the bank. Now, when they deposit that money in the bank, and if I asked 100 people, is that an asset or a liability? They always tell me what?
It's an asset.
It's an asset. But what they haven't thought about is it's a liability because they have to give you that money back anytime you want it. And they haven't done anything with it. They haven't earned anything, right? Now, how do they turn that into an asset? Well, they loan it to a borrower, and the loan is the asset. And now, Nick, I own part of a small commercial bank in South Dakota. And if we were sitting in a board meeting, we'd be talking about our loan portfolio, because that we're talking about our assets. How are our assets performing?
Sure.
Okay. Because what the bank knows is that the borrower has to pay the bank interest, and they have collateral, right? And then they're going to pay us interest as the depositor. Now, by the way, when I look at this, Nick, that looks really fair. Looks really balanced. And I would see no problem looking at this on the surface thinking, man, the bank is really doing a community service, right?
No. Except for a little problem we talked about a couple episodes, is that that's not your money anymore.
That's right. And by the way, I hope that the guys that are my co-partners in that bank up there are not watching this. So let's say that I put $10,000 in the bank, right? Well, let's say the bank's going to pay me 0.2%. Well, that's $20. Yeah. Pay me a whole $20 over the next year. And let's say they could loan it out at 5.2%. That's $520.
Yep.
Now, we are taught to believe this. The bank is making $500 more than us, no big deal. That's thinking like a consumer, because that's not how a business works. This is our cost of doing business. This is our profit. We divide our cost into our profit. And we see that $20 goes into $520 26 times. 26 times means that the bank made 2,600% more than you with your money. Seem fair? Seem right? Seem like something you should be doing instead of them? Okay, hold on. So now we have to understand what's happening. And what Shakespeare said is, if you understand the players in the play, you'll know what's going on. Okay. Now, I never understood Shakespeare, Nick, but I do understand this. I have a depositor. That's number one. I have the owner of the bank, not the vice president at the bank, not your buddy that's the president of the bank.
Everybody's the president anyway.
What?
Everybody's a vice president.
That's right. That's right. The tellers are vice presidents. Owner of the bank and the borrower. Now, infinite banking in a nutshell is just blocking this off or walling this off to where you're all three of these things. Because if you think about it, Nick, if you have money, remember, there's only one banking system in the world. So if you have money deposited at banks and you have money borrowed from the bank, in essence, the banking system is making 2,600% more than you with your money from you.
I know, it's crazy.
Now, who would do that if in the right mind they understood that?
That's right. That's why Nelson said, if you know what's going on, you'll know what to do.
Okay, so, look, for the people in the audience that are pessimists and doubters and thinking maybe Jim and Nick just got this wrong, this is Bank of America's numbers. And it's right out of their bank analytical report. And everybody's heard of Bank of America, hopefully. And it's from December 31st of 2016. Now, why 2016? Why not 2020? Again, going back to how we started this podcast, is the 2020 numbers will be out of date because now it's 2021 and then it's the first quarter, the second quarter. I mean, it's the concept, right? And this is the report. So I'm going to review this really quickly here, Nick. The top highlight says that their interest-bearing deposits are 860 billion. Okay. And the bottom highlight says interest expense. Now, Nick, that's what they pay us, right? 1.9 billion. Now, for you engineers out there, I know that I'm using round numbers. Just deal with it, okay? And that's about 2.2% of the 860. So the 1.9 that they pay us is about 0.2% of the 860 billion, right? Which we already had in there. The next highlight above the expense for them is income. What we pay them, 44.8 billion. Well, that's 5.2% of the 860. We already know that's a 26-to-1 ratio. Nick, 26-to-1. Is that crazy?
It is crazy. It's, and I want you, those of you that have checked this out online there, when Jim put that picture up of the three players in the play, there's a lot of noise out there about infinite banking, about how to do this, what it looks like. And I just want you to realize that that picture is really an example of signal amongst all the noise. It is that simple. We don't have to overcomplicate it. It's as simple as being the depositor, the owner, and the borrower of the bank. And if that gets confusing, if we get mired and we're confused by the quote unquote the solution, then we have to go back to the problem and understand the problem that is going on. And that is that we're giving up control of our money to other people and they're winning ultimately.
Absolutely. Okay, so Nick, we could try to start our own bank, like this commercial bank. We'd need about, probably more than what Nelson states in the book, 20 million. And we got to put that money in. That's called our capital, right? And then we got to get a charter, and then we got to get depositors. We got to do advertising. We got to do all of this stuff. And it's going to take years and years and years. And if we could go buy a bank, good luck with that, by the way. But then you could start right away and you've got everything, and it would cost a lot of money because banks are really valuable. But how about starting your own bank in a better way? Now, again, when we're talking about a bank, remember, think of it like a food bank where we're storing up money to be used. It's not, you don't have to think of it like a commercial bank. But if we think about it, banking is all about accumulating money and making loans to people who will pay them back. So who's the ideal customer for this system?
We are, because
we're going to pay it back, right?
Our need for finance. Remember, we're solving the problem of finance. And I know we've mentioned this in the prior episodes, but this is a great, you just reminded me, banking is infinite banking is not about a product. It's about a process. It's just the process of banking. We're going to build this little warehouse of wealth, hat tip to Nelson's other book that you can get at infinitebanking.org, but it's just a process that we're going to do.
Exactly. And here's what happens is when we pay ourselves back, we have that money to use again and again and again and again, and we create velocity, right? Now, that's powerful. So that if you think about, he talks about the cogeneration power in banking. What did you take from that, Nick?
Cogeneration is that, hey, this is a really profitable little business. It's like, hey, if you bought a McDonald's and we got that thing turning out at 15, 20% profit, well, would I want to go do a different business that maybe have a lower profit margin, or would I want to build another McDonald's, have another one? And that's what you see. Bank of America's got, probably thousands of branches. That's not by chance. McDonald's, I've yet to talk to a McDonald's owner that didn't seem to own at least a dozen of them.
Right. Exactly. Why wouldn't you?
That's right.
And by the way, people that do infinite banking and do it at a high level, they own multiple policies, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, Nelson had 49 policies at one point. Yeah. He gave some away. Okay, so let's get to IBC and the basics just in trying to be respectful of everybody's time and try to keep this moving. All right. So banking, the business of a bank, originally was restricted to money changing, and now is devoted to taking money on deposit and then loaning money and credit in any other associated form, generally dealing with in money or credit. I really kind of butchered that, didn't I? But it's in the book. It's a much clearer. So we have to understand we finance every single thing that we buy. Like Nick said earlier, we either pay interest or we give up interest we could have earned somewhere else. And we've talked about in this series economic value added, right? Our money has a cost. When you buy an insurance policy to do infinite banking, there's a lot of people that own insurance policies that they don't get much out of them. Let's say they're with the quiet company that wants you to leave your money in there and not use it. And it's all about how well they're going to do for you, right? And they'll talk about dividends, right? Right. How well your money's sitting in there for them long-term is going to work. But then somebody like Nick Kosko or somebody else that understands infinite banking, they're going to put their money to work, and they're going to put their policy to work, and they're going to be loaning it, paying it back, loaning it, paying back, creating velocity of money. And it's the equivalent of somebody buying a car and driving it like bat out of Hades and only getting 50,000 miles, or somebody buying a car and getting 200,000-300,000, maybe 1,000,000 miles out of. Right? I mean, they always have that Mercedes that it's got 1,000,000 miles on it. I'm thinking, who wants to drive a car that's got 1,000,000 miles on it? But I want to drive an insurance contract that's got 1,000,000 miles on it. I can tell you that much for sure. Now, the engineers, okay, in these insurance contracts, they design these insurance contracts, and then the legal people come in, right? Here's the really important thing to understand. You're the owner of the contract, not the company. When you buy a car, Ford doesn't own it anymore, or Mercedes or BMW, whatever. You own it. So now what happens to it and how it performs is up to you.
That's right. And it kind of reminds me, hey, that bank, they don't want just a little deposit, right? They want all of your money to flow through it, right? Because the more that happens, the more money that comes into it, just like Bank of America had $8 billion or 860 billion of deposits. The system doesn't work as well if they only had 50 billion of deposits, right? So the more of our money that we flow through it, the more loans we deploy, and the more that we are an honest banker, as Nelson belabored, and we pay back those loans, the more that system works. You mentioned velocity. That's what's going on. That is money coming in, money going out, money coming in, money going out. It's, remember, motion's the law of God. The more that happens, this little engine, the more miles you get out of it. It's like you're adding horsepower to it, and it just gets better and better and better over time. And I would encourage everyone to get this book, and Nelson really lays out some good stuff here that we won't belabor the details of the dividend and how that works and whatnot too much here in this episode, but he really lays that out well in this chapter of the book, Jim.
Yeah, I really want everybody to read in this chapter the problem and solution, a simple example. Okay, and again, Nick, we're not going to go through all of that right now because, but I want you to read that like 2 or 3 times until it makes absolute clarity, makes absolute sense in your mind, and then okay, so then what Nelson gets into, Nick, is how you just said the policy gets better and better and better, and he shows an example. Okay, now this is really important because he shows an example from a policy that he took out in 1959 that was sold to him by his brother, okay, who later died at 52 years old of a heart attack, right? And Nelson had a heart attack, and thank God he lived. But Nelson paid into that policy $388. And he shows in his, I can't remember the date of the check, but it was 5,700 or something like that. This was later in his lifetime. I think it was the last time we had him live, Nick, which was in Louisville, right?
Yes.
But it was something like 388, and then he has like over $5,000, right? Which he has this example in the book. Right. And then this is the really important part here. How much does he wish the premium was? Okay, now think about this. This is a simple question. Is if $388 turns into over 5,000, right? So you write me a check, Nick, for $388. I turn around and write you one for $5,000. First of all, how many times today do you want to do that?
As many times as you'll let me.
That's right. And then second, how big do you want that first check to be?
As big as possible. And that's why Nelson would tell the story. He goes, when I graduate and I run into my brother, I'm gonna get on him for not selling me more of this.
That's right. That's right. I love that story too. Okay, so now, and Nelson talks in here how he really didn't use this policy as efficiently as he could have with the dividend options and everything else. Okay. But now, then he gives an example of how you can make other investments with IBC. Okay, now this is really where our passion comes in, Nick, is the rest of it is laying the groundwork, but you can make other investments like real estate. And he gives us some examples of a real estate deal that he did and, that he bought for $38 per acre and he sold for $500 an acre. What's my rate of return on that, Nick? And how much money did Nelson Nash have in that deal?
Nelson had no money in the deal, which means his rate of return was infinite.
Why do you call it the infinite banking test? Oh, that's why. And okay, so right.
What and there's infinite amount of uses for it. Like everyone wants a cookie cutter. Hey, this is the program I'm going to buy. Well, we're not the firm to work with then. If that's what you want, this is Nelson said in the book. He gives a hat tip. I think to Einstein is imagination is more important than knowledge. Something like that.
Absolutely,
but your imagination.
Yeah. I mean, Nick, here's the thing is as we do this, what happens to us financially?
we flourish.
We become totally self-sufficient, right? We become financially independent and free. And, one of the things that, you brought up his brother. And one of the things I love is why didn't his brother sell him more premium?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, the answer is, why didn't his brother tell him how to do this? He was in the insurance business. Nelson wasn't at the time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because most insurance, this isn't about the insurance, right? This is about the process of banking. And there's so many people out there that are just selling insurance and they focus on these illustrations and whatnot. Jim, we're in this little season right now. It seems like we have people coming to us and they have these other policies and they're like, this thing doesn't look like it's going to work like what you guys are talking about. And it's because people just bought an illustration. They're buying somebody else's program instead of a program that works for them. And, we're happy to serve them and help them, fine tune their system and whatnot. But it is so important to understand the process.
That's right. And here's the bottom line. State Farm didn't teach his brother about this. That's why he didn't know. I mean, that's why he didn't do it is because he didn't know.
Yeah.
Okay. So then what about inflation? I mean, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because here's the thing, Nick, is that Nelson's death benefit kept up with inflation and exceeded inflation. And inflation is such a crazy number. But the other thing that we're going to do is we're going to buy assets and we're going to buy businesses that keep up with inflation. We're going to do that with our banking system. Okay. Assets, instruments die during inflation. Assets thrive during inflation. It's the new money rules, as Nick or Kiyosaki would say, and Nick would say too. And all right, so let's get to the 5 simple rules and we'll wrap this thing up because this is turning into a longer episode. And if you're still listening, we really appreciate it. So here's 5 simple rules, and we're not going to go into them. We're just going to say them. I'll go with the first one, Nick, and then we'll just rotate. Think long range.
Be generous in capitalizing your system.
We just talked about that. Don't steal from your system. That's always a good advice.
And Nelson, I can just hear him saying this one: don't do business with banks.
That's right. And this last one is the one that I would put at the top, is rethink your thinking. You have to think differently before you start this. Okay. So we just gave you a lot of information. If this is the first time that you've ever heard any of this information, then congratulations. And the way that you would proceed to find out more is go to createtailwind.com, right? And just look, our system is we just educate people on this. There's lots of information on there. Go to our YouTube channel, CreateTailwind. No, that's not CreateTailwind.com. That's just CreateTailwind. And educate yourself. Nick, any famous last words?
No, just never be afraid to rethink your thinking, because it's never too late to start doing the right thing.
I love that. I couldn't wrap it up any better. But you know what? If you don't rethink your thinking, then you're going to be stuck in the herd. And if you never break away, there's only one thing that happens in the herd, and that's bad. So let's break away today. Thank you for listening. Nick, thank you for joining me. Until next time, I'm Jim Oliver, your host. And thank you, Nick, again, for being a great guest host, or a co-host, I should say.